The rain had already turned the world into a blur of gray by the time I crossed into western Pennsylvania, a lonely stretch of countryside where towns were small, cell service was non-existent, and the woods grew thick enough to swallow the sky. I was headed to an old family cabin I hadn't visited since I was 12, one I barely remembered, but had suddenly felt compelled to return to after a chaotic year of stress, loss, and sleepless nights. My mother had warned me that the cabin hadn't been used in over a decade, that it didn't have reliable electricity, and that hunters in the area sometimes wandered too close to private land. But I wanted silence. I wanted rain. I wanted to disappear for a few days into a world that wasn't constantly tugging at me from every direction. By sunset, the storm had intensified into a full November downpour. The dirt road leading to the cabin had become a narrow trench of mud, my tires slipping as I navigated the final mile through a tunnel of leafless trees. The wipers thrashed back and forth, the radio hissed with static. When I finally saw the cabin, dark, sagging, and half hidden by the encroaching woods, a sharp unease twisted in my gut. The place looked smaller than I remembered, the porch warped, the chimney crumbling. Yet something in the familiarity tugged at me, urging me inside. I parked near the porch, grabbed my backpack, and hurried through the rain. The key, old brass, stained with age, fit stiffly into the lock. With a shove, the door creaked open, exhaling a cold breath of air that smelled like wet wood and long-abandoned space. The interior was dim, even with the lights turned on. A single overhead bulb flickered weakly, illuminating a room filled with dusty furniture draped in sheets, a stone fireplace blackened from years of smoke, and shelves of old hunting gear my uncle had left behind. I dragged the sheets off the furniture, started a fire, and listened as the rain hammered the roof like 1,000 frantic fingers. The warmth helped, but the cabin still felt off, like something had changed in the years since I'd last been here. The quiet was heavy, oppressive even. As night came fully, the storm grew louder. Thunder rolled through the hills, and the trees thrashed in the wind as though trying to claw their way free from the earth. I made myself a simple dinner over the gas stove, sat by the fire, and tried to relax. But sometime around 10 p.m. I heard it, a knock, slow, heavy, measured. 3 raps on the front door. I sat frozen, fork halfway to my mouth. The wind had been battering the cabin all night, but this was different. The knocks were too deliberate, too calm. I set the fork down carefully and approached the door. The porch light was dead, drowned by the storm, but I peered through the small front window anyway. Nothing. Just sheets of rain and the dark shapes of trees bending in the wind. I waited, my heart beat loud in the silence. A minute passed, then 2. I tried to breathe again. Maybe a branch had struck the door, maybe the storm had rattled something loose. But then the knocking came again. Not on the front door. This time, on the back door. A cold shiver ran through me. No one should have been back there. The cabin backed up to dense woods, thick and tangled enough that you'd need a machete to push through them. I grabbed the fire iron from the hearth, more for the illusion of safety than any real defense, and moved toward the back room where the door stood. My breath fogged in the colder air there. I listened. Nothing now. No footsteps, no voice. Just the storm picking up, the wind screaming through the trees. Still, I checked the door. It was locked. I forced a laugh, sharp and unconvincing even to myself, turned and went back to the fire. The knocking started again an hour later, and again. Always slow, always 3 raps, always alternating between the front and back door. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Something primal inside me screamed not to open anything, not even a curtain or window flap. Around midnight, the electricity died. The cabin plunged into darkness, the fire the only source of light, flickering against the walls. The shadows stretched tall and thin, swaying like they were alive. I sat rigid, gripping the fire iron until my hand cramped, listening as the knocking turned to footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Dragging. They moved around the cabin, then stopped, then moved again. Sometimes right beside the wall nearest me, sometimes circling the whole structure. Then came the whisper. Soft. So soft I almost thought I imagined it. Let me in. My blood turned to ice. It came from the window nearest the couch. A breath, barely a voice, just on the other side of the glass. Cold, it whispered. So cold. Let me in. The voice didn't sound quite human. The words were shaped right, but the tone was wrong, drawn out, uneven, like someone mimicking speech without understanding it. I pressed my back against the wall, watching the window, waiting for a shape to appear. Lightning flashed. For a split second, I saw something tall and pale, standing just beyond the tree line. Not a person. Not any animal I recognized. Long limbs, bent posture, eyes like wet, shining marbles reflecting the lightning. Then the darkness swallowed it again. The whispering grew desperate, circling the cabin. "Let me in, please. I'm so cold. Open." It tailed off into strange, warbling sounds that made my teeth hurt. Something scraped along the window glass, lightly at first, then with more force. I stayed awake all night, unable to move, unable to look away from the shifting shapes in the rain-soaked darkness outside. When dawn finally crept in, watery and gray, the whispers stopped. The footsteps ceased, the scraping ended, the forest went dead silent. I waited another hour before gathering the courage to open the front door. The cold morning air rushed inside, carrying the smell of wet earth and something faintly metallic, like blood. The mud on the porch was covered in prints, huge prints, misshapen, deep enough to suggest something much heavier than a person. They circled the cabin several times, and at the final step, right at the front door, there lay a soaked, half-rotten scrap of paper. I crouched, afraid to touch it, but the words were still visible through the mud and water stains. "You shouldn't have come back." My stomach lurched. I scanned the woods, half expecting to see it again, watching me from between the trees. The forest remained still, but not empty. It felt like the trees themselves were holding their breath. I didn't pack neatly. I shoved everything into my bag, grabbed my keys, and almost ripped the door off its hinges, fleeing to my car. The engine sputtered before catching, and I reversed so fast the tires slid in the mud. Only when the cabin disappeared behind a bend in the road did I start breathing again. It wasn't until I reached town, 30 miles away, that I stopped at a gas station to calm down. My hands shook violently. The cashier, an older man with sunken eyes, glanced at me. "You look like you saw a ghost," he muttered. I told him what happened, what I heard, what I saw, the paper on the porch, his face drained of color. "You shouldn't have stayed out there alone," he whispered. "People around here know better. Things in those woods ain't right. Been stories for years. People hear voices that don't belong to anyone." He leaned in. "You hear knocking?" I nodded. His expression hardened with fear. "If it ever follows you home," he said quietly, "don't open the door. Doesn't matter what it sounds like. Don't open it." I left without buying anything. That night, back home, I sat awake listening to the familiar sounds of my apartment. Traffic, neighbors, pipes groaning. But just before midnight, as the rain began tapping against my windows, I heard it. 3 slow knocks at my front door. I haven't answered. I won't. Not ever. Story, the end. Rain hammered against the windshield in heavy, wind-driven sheets, and the wipers on my truck were losing the battle. I was somewhere on a back road outside Millfield, Ohio. Flat farmland, bare trees, and a sky so black it felt like the sun had never existed. November storms always hit harder out here, but this one was different. It felt angry. I was heading home from a late shift at the factory, tired enough to feel my eyelids fighting to close. When the truck sputtered once, twice, then died altogether, I almost thought I'd drifted into a dream. The engine clicked as it cooled, the headlights dimmed, flickered, and then shut off completely. Everything went pitch black except for the faint glow of my phone screen. No signal. Of course. I tried restarting the engine. Nothing. Just a dull click, as if the truck didn't even have the energy to protest. Rain hammered the hood. Wind buffeted the truck hard enough to make it rock. Then something hit the back of the truck. Hard. Like a fist or a body. I whipped around, heart slamming. The rear windows were fogged over. I couldn't see a thing. I told myself it was a branch or debris blown by the storm. But the next sound wasn't the wind. It was footsteps. Slow, weighted, circling. I locked the doors. For several long seconds, there was only rain. Then, from the left side of the truck, something scraped along the metal. Not claws. Not a branch. Fingers. I froze, my breath turning shallow. My phone vibrated suddenly, making me jump. The screen lit with a single notification. Unknown number. Don't look at it. I stared at the message, pulse pounding. Before I could react, another sound came, a soft tapping at the driver's side window. Measured. Intentional. Tap, tap, tap. I kept my eyes forward. Something in my gut, Something primal told me not to turn. Not yet. The tapping grew more insistent, faster. Now footsteps on mud shifted outside, as though whatever stood there was growing impatient. My phone vibrated again. Unknown number. Whatever you do, don't open the door. My throat tightened. Against my will, my eyes slid toward the window. A shape stood just inches away. Tall. Human-shaped. But not right. Too long in the limbs, too still in the storm, and its head rested against the glass like it was listening to my breathing. I couldn't see its face. Just the outline. A silhouette darker than the storm behind it. It raised a hand slowly and pressed 5 long skeletal fingers to the window. Rainwater ran down the glass in rivulets, distorting the shape, making the fingers look like they stretched longer, boneless, bending wrong. I jerked my gaze forward, breath trembling. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. It knows you saw it. The tapping stopped. The silhouette didn't move. Then, from the passenger side, something slammed against the door. I yelped, turning. Another shape, shorter but equally wrong, pressed its face to the glass. I could see this one more clearly. The skin was gray, bloated, hanging in folds like it had absorbed water for far too long. Its eyes were sunken hollows. Its mouth hung open as if it had no muscle left to close it. And it was smiling. I scrambled across the seat away from it, hitting the opposite door. The tall one outside the driver's side window began dragging its fingers down the glass, slow enough to make a high, keening squeal. Behind them, more shapes appeared, at least 5, no, 7, emerging from the darkness and sloshing through the mud toward the truck. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. They're already dead. You can't speak to them. You can't help them. Don't acknowledge them. The bloated figure on the passenger side began pounding its forehead against the window, harder and harder, each hit leaving a smear of black water and something thicker. I threw myself into the back seat. The truck rocked violently, hands slapped against the metal from all sides. The tall one's hand began to test the handle. My heart stuttered. I fumbled through my backpack, searching for anything. Anything. My hand closed around a heavy flashlight. Not a weapon, but better than nothing. The truck lurched again. Glass began to spiderweb on the passenger side. I had seconds. My phone buzzed once more. Unknown number. The barrier will break. You need to leave. Now. Out the back window. Do not touch the ground near the truck. They're under it. A groaning sound rose beneath me. The floor of the truck buckled upward slightly, like something was pushing from underneath. Panic surged through me. I unlocked the back window and shoved it open. Cold rain slammed into me immediately. The shapes around the truck grew frantic, slamming their bodies into the doors, smearing the windows with dark water and mud, and something else, something thick and oily. One of them let out a sound, not a scream, a gurgling moan, like its lungs were full of water. My arms trembled as I pulled myself halfway out of the window. The storm felt almost welcoming compared to what waited inside the truck. Behind me, metal screeched as a door handle began to bend outward. I twisted, hooked my legs out, and dropped into the truck bed. Rain soaked me instantly. Wind howled. The bed was slick, but I scrambled toward the tailgate. The shapes swarmed the sides of the truck, hands reaching over the rails, gray fingers bending wrong, grabbing at the air just inches from my coat. I jumped. My boots hit the ground, far enough from the truck that I didn't go anywhere near the dark space underneath. I sprinted toward the faint lights of a distant farmhouse. Mud splashed, wind cut into me, but I ran until my lungs burned. Halfway there, I slipped in the mud and hit the ground hard. When I pushed myself up, I looked back. The truck was rocking violently. The shapes were crawling all over it, their movements jerky and unnatural. Some slid beneath it, some clawed at the metal. One stretched its neck so far its head nearly detached. They were eating the truck, chewing through metal like it was soft bread. My phone buzzed again, screen cracked but still glowing. Unknown number. Don't stop. They know you now. They'll follow if you let them. I ran again. By the time I reached the farmhouse, my legs nearly gave out. I pounded on the door until a man in his 50s answered, shotgun in hand. He saw my face, soaked and shaking, and wordlessly pulled me inside. Before I could speak, he said, "You broke down on the East Road, didn't you?" I nodded. He locked the door. Bolted it, deadbolted it. Then he closed the curtains. "You weren't supposed to stop there," he muttered. "Nobody's supposed to stop there." He gave me a blanket, made me sit and paced in front of the window, like listening. Every so often he glanced toward the dark fields outside. They drowned in '87, he finally said. A school bus, flooded bridge, bodies were never recovered, water buried them under silt and mud. Folks round here say they still wander that stretch of road when the storms come, looking for anyone who'll stop, anyone who'll help. A loud thud hit the side of the farmhouse, then another. The man's face went pale. They followed you. He blew out the lantern, plunging us into darkness. Outside, hands dragged themselves across the siding, nails scraped. Something heavy bumped against the walls. A wet, gurgling moan drifted through the storm, closer than it should have been. The man held a finger to his lips and whispered, "Don't look out the windows. Don't open the door. Don't make a sound." We waited in the dark as the storm raged and the dead circled the house. They didn't leave until dawn. When the first light broke through the horizon, I looked outside. They were gone. No footprints, no signs. Nothing but my truck in the distance, crushed, shredded, drowned with water pooled inside the cab, though it hadn't rained for hours. My phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. Don't take that road again. Some storms don't let go. I left Millfield that same morning. Drove home on different highways, different states, different everything. But on rainy November nights, when the sky goes that same pitch black, sometimes I hear the tapping again, soft, measured, patient, and sometimes my phone lights up, even with no signal. Unknown number, we remember you. Story the end. The rain had been falling since late afternoon, steady at first, then growing heavier until it felt like the entire night was drowning. By the time I left my friend's place in rural West Virginia, the November storm had swallowed the hills, turning the winding mountain roads into dark, slick tunnels. I didn't want to drive home in it, but my boss expected me at work at dawn, and staying over wasn't an option. My phone had only 7% battery when I started the car. Service was spotty up there, so I didn't think much of it. I kept the radio low, listening to the rain hammer the windshield in erratic bursts, sometimes soft, sometimes pounding hard enough that it made the glass tremble. About 10 minutes down the mountain, I saw blue lights flashing in the distance. An accident, I figured. When I got closer, I realized it was just one sheriff's cruiser parked sideways on the road, blocking the way forward. The driver's door was open, swinging slightly in the wind. No sign of the officer. I slowed to a crawl. The headlights illuminated deep gouges in the wet asphalt, long and sharp as if something with claws had scraped the road. I tried not to think about it. Maybe some kind of equipment fell off a truck earlier. Maybe the deputy chased someone into the woods. Nothing supernatural, just mountain weirdness. Then I noticed something else. Blood. Not a ton, but enough to stand out even in the rain. Thick streaks washed in jagged lines toward the ditch. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Unknown number. I glanced at it, startled. Call failed appeared on the screen, even though I hadn't touched it. Then it rang again. Same unknown number. When I answered, all I heard was frantic breathing. Wet, shaky, terrified. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice almost drowned by the storm. More breathing, then a muffled whisper, "Don't. Stop your car." The line cut out, my chest tightened. I looked around again, the empty cruiser, the open door, the blood, the scratches. I eased my foot onto the gas, steering around the cruiser as carefully as I could, trying not to think about the strange warning. The road narrowed as I rounded the next bend. Trees leaned inward from both sides, their branches dripping and swaying like skeletal fingers. My wipers struggled to keep up. The storm had turned into a white sheet of rain. That's when I saw the woman. She stood on the shoulder, soaked through, hair plastered across her face, wearing a light gray hoodie and jeans, clothes too thin for that cold night. She didn't wave, didn't move, didn't look up, just stood there in the downpour, facing the trees. I slowed again. Something felt off. The way her arms hung slightly behind her, the unnatural arch in her back, the way her head tilted too far to the side as if her neck had given out. "Do not stop your car." The whisper from the phone echoed in my mind. I rolled forward, trying to keep distance, when her head snapped toward me, not turned, not lifted, but snapped, like something jerked it. Her face came into full view, and a shock went through me so fast I nearly swerved. Her eyes were wide, but not with fear, with emptiness. No recognition, no fear, no humanity. Just cold, black pupils that seemed too large, swallowing the little light the headlights managed to cast. Her mouth hung open, jaw slack, as if she were silently screaming. My foot slammed the gas pedal by reflex. As the car lurched forward, something hit the back of the vehicle, hard enough to make the whole frame shudder. I screamed and checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just darkness and rain. Not stopping, I muttered to myself, hands shaking. But I could feel it. Something was wrong in the car, a presence that hadn't been there before. The sound of wet breathing again, but this time it wasn't coming from a phone. It was coming from behind me. I didn't dare look. My eyes locked forward, staring down the narrow road. Every instinct screamed not to turn around. I gripped the wheel so hard my nails bit into my palms. The breathing grew louder, closer, slow and ragged like lungs full of water. Then a faint voice right behind my ear. "You didn't stop. Good." I choked back a cry. The road straightened ahead. Another mile, and I'd reach the highway. I pressed the gas harder, praying I wouldn't skid on the turns. My vision blurred from panic and the rain streaking the windshield. The presence leaned closer, cold breath brushing the side of my neck. "You need to take me back." "No," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. "No, no." The thing, whatever it was, moved again. A wet hand rested lightly on my shoulder. I screamed. As I did, the car burst onto the main highway, storm lights blinding me. The presence vanished instantly, like someone ripping a weight off me. My shoulder burned with a freezing cold that lingered even after the hand disappeared. The breathing was gone. The voice was gone. The back seat was empty. I didn't stop driving until I reached my apartment parking lot nearly 40 minutes away. I sat there, forehead pressed to the steering wheel, drenched in sweat and rainwater and shaking so badly I could barely move. When I finally got out, I forced myself to check the car. 3 long, deep scratches carved across the left side of the trunk. Not like a key, not like an animal. Parallel even, perfectly spaced, like fingers. I tried calling the sheriff's office the next morning to report the abandoned cruiser. They told me no deputies were assigned to that road last night. No patrols, no incidents, no officers missing. I drove back later in daylight out of pure disbelief. The cruiser was gone. No scratches on the asphalt, no blood, no sign anyone had ever been there. Except for one thing. A gray hoodie lay in the ditch, soaking wet, covered in mud but unmistakably human. I didn't touch it. I just backed away and drove home without looking back. I moved out of that town less than a month later. But every November rainstorm, when the wind shakes the windows, I hear that wet breathing behind me again. Soft, patient, waiting for me to make the mistake of stopping. And sometimes I catch a whiff of cold air brushing my neck. Story, the end. Rain hammered the roof of the bus station like handfuls of gravel thrown by an angry giant. The November wind cut through the glass panels, making the whole building groan with every gust. It was almost 1 a.m. when I ended up there, alone, stranded, the last bus of the night canceled because of flooding on the county roads. The station sat on the outskirts of a small Pennsylvania town, surrounded by factories long since closed and rail lines that only freight trains used now. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed overhead, flickering occasionally, as if unsure whether to keep burning. The only other sign of life was the old soda machine humming in the corner, half its buttons broken. It should have felt peaceful in that lonely, late-night way. But the air inside felt wrong. Heavy. Too still. I took a seat on one of the rigid plastic benches, wrapping my coat tighter around me. My phone showed no signal. Storm must have knocked out a tower. The rain outside intensified, drumming so hard on the windows that the glass trembled. That was when I heard it. A soft metallic clink, followed by another, then another. It came from down the corridor that led to the restrooms and the employee's office. A part of the station that was dark, the lights dead. At first, I thought maybe it was just the storm shaking something loose. But the rhythm was too steady, slow, intentional. I called out, "Hello, anyone there?" No answer. Just the clink, clink, clink. I tried to ignore it, turning my attention to the storm outside, but a sudden flash of lightning lit up the building for an instant, and in that moment, I saw something at the end of the dark hallway. A silhouette. Tall. Still. Facing me. I blinked, heart thudding, but the lights flickered back to their normal buzz, and the corridor was empty again. The sound stopped. For a full minute, the station was silent, except for the rain and the buzzing fluorescent light. I told myself I had imagined it, that I was tired, that the shadow was just a coat rack or some piece of furniture. But then the smell hit me. A faint, iron-like scent. Metallic. Sharp. It drifted slowly from the hallway toward where I sat. I stood up. My instinct screamed at me to leave, storm or not. But stepping outside meant exposing myself to the pounding rain, near zero visibility, and waterlogged streets. And instead of running, I found myself walking slowly toward the hallway. Every step felt like it sank deeper into dread. When I reached the entrance to the dark corridor, the air turned noticeably colder. A flickering exit sign provided the only illumination. The restroom doors were halfway down, one on each side. Beyond them was the employee office, its doors slightly ajar. The metallic smell grew stronger. I swallowed hard. Hello? Is someone hurt? Silence. I took another small step forward, and something metal scraped loudly across the floor inside the restroom. I spun, heart leaping into my throat. The men's restroom door swayed slightly as if someone had bumped it. The corridor lights flickered, then went completely black. I backed up fast, the dark swallowing the hallway behind me. The buzzing overhead lights in the waiting area blinked twice, then steadied. The storm outside roared louder, wind howling through unseen cracks. A new sound came from the hallway, a low, wet dragging, something pulling itself along the tile floor. Slowly, I couldn't breathe. My pulse thundered. The dragging grew closer. I stepped backward until my legs hit one of the benches. I steadied myself on it, eyes fixed on the blackened corridor. Something moved. A shape crawled out from the darkness. At first I saw only a pale hand gripping the floor. Long fingers, too long, bending like joints weren't fixed right. Then another hand. Then a face emerged from the shadows, inches above the tiles, upside down, staring at me from beneath tangled, dripping hair. Its eyes were wide, black, empty. A slow smile spread across its too thin face, stretching farther than a human mouth could stretch. It whispered, voice like wet gravel grinding together. Cold night. That was all I needed. I bolted toward the entrance doors. The automatic sensors didn't activate. I slammed into the glass. I shoved at the door, but it didn't budge. Locked. Sealed. Behind me, the dragging grew faster. I threw myself at the emergency push bar. It clicked, but the door still held as if something on the outside pressed against it. Rain pounded on the other side like fists. The lights flickered again. Went out. Came back dimmer. I looked back. The figure stood now. Twisted, too tall, its limbs bent wrong. Its neck lolled sideways like it was broken. Water dripped from its clothes, pooling under its feet. It tilted its head, first one way, then the other, like a predator studying prey. Something glinted in its hand. A bus station keychain, one of the employee badges still attached. It stepped forward. The floor creaked under its weight despite the creature's almost skeleton-like frame. I grabbed a metal trash can, lifted it, and hurled it at the emergency window. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. The creature hissed softly. The lights overhead dimmed further. I ran for the office door, the one that had been ajar earlier. I pushed inside and slammed it closed behind me, turning the lock. The office was tiny. Papers scattered everywhere, overturned chairs, a half-drunk coffee cup long molded over with a dark green fuzz. The smell of iron, overpowering now, made my eyes water. On the desk lay a radio transmitter, old but functional. I grabbed it and clicked the button. Hello? Anyone? Please, I need help. I'm trapped in the county bus station. Something's inside. Static. Then a faint voice broke through. Station. Closed. Evacuate. Please, I shouted. Help me. Something's here. Another burst, then the voice returned, clearer. No one should be inside the station. The last employee left hours ago. Do not approach anything you see. Stay hidden, and the transmission cut off abruptly. A soft tapping began on the office door. Tap, 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 tap. The handle twisted gently, slowly, playfully, then stopped. Silence. I didn't breathe for nearly a full minute. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. I tried to peek through the thin gap under it, but the lights outside flickered too brightly and too dimly to make anything out. With trembling hands, I searched the office for anything usable. A drawer held a flashlight. I grabbed it, clicked it on. It flickered weakly, but it worked. I turned toward the back of the office and noticed another door, probably a maintenance closet or emergency exit. Heart hammering, I rushed to it and turned the knob. It opened. A narrow stairwell led downward. Pitch black. Cold air drifted up from it. Far below, water dripped steadily, echoing like footsteps. I hesitated at the top. Going down meant stepping into absolute darkness. Staying meant waiting for whatever was outside that office door. The lights in the office flickered violently. The door handle twisted again, harder this time, rattling against the lock. I stepped into the stairwell and closed the door behind me. The clicking from the office door echoed once more. Then the unmistakable sound of wood splintering as something started pushing through. I descended the steps fast. My flashlight beam shook, barely illuminating the rough concrete walls. After about 20 steps, I reached a landing and another door. I pushed it open. The basement of the bus station sprawled out before me. Rows of old equipment, pipes overhead dripping brown water, and a long access tunnel leading away from the building, probably used for deliveries decades ago. A loud crash thundered from above. The office door had given way. I ran down the tunnel, splashing through puddles, flashlight bouncing wildly. My breath echoed in the confined space. Behind me, something crawled into the stairwell. I heard its limbs scraping the walls. Fast, I pushed harder, lungs burning, legs shaking. At the far end of the tunnel was a metal hatch. Rusty, but real. An exit. I slammed into it with my shoulder. It groaned open, letting in a blast of cold night air and pouring rain. I stumbled out behind the station, into the mud and darkness. But the rain wasn't alone. As lightning ripped across the sky, I saw it standing in the stairwell doorway behind me, its body twisted with rage, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes blacker than the storm above us. It stepped into the tunnel, but when another flash lit the sky, the creature recoiled violently. It hated the light. It feared it. I ran into the open, letting the storm soak me to the bone, not stopping until the main road came into view. A pair of headlights blinded me, an approaching police cruiser skidding to a stop. 2 officers rushed out shouting, but I collapsed before they reached me. Later in the hospital, they told me they searched the station. Nothing was there, not a broken door, not a disturbed object, no sign of forced entry, no evidence of a creature. They suggested stress, exhaustion, hallucination, but I know what I saw, what I heard, what nearly dragged me into the dark. And sometimes on cold, rainy November nights, I hear a faint metallic clink, clink outside my window, as if something long-fingered is tapping, waiting for me to open the curtains. Story the end. The rain had already begun to pool along the gutters by the time I left the interstate and turned down the narrow back road that led toward the old Clarkson property. The wipers scraped across the windshield in tired, rhythmic arcs as the storm thickened into a sheet of relentless gray. Trees bent against the wind, shedding brittle November leaves that slapped against the hood of my SUV. The GPS struggled in and out, the signal flickering until the map froze entirely. Typical. There were stories about this part of rural Pennsylvania, stories I always dismissed as small-town superstition. But that night, with the storm swallowing the world beyond my headlights, even I felt a creeping unease. I was headed to deal with the estate of my former college professor, Richard Clarkson. The man had been brilliant, eccentric, and deeply troubled, though no one realized just how troubled until after the news broke. Clarkson had passed away 3 weeks earlier, heart attack, supposedly, alone at his isolated farmhouse on the edge of Perry County. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade, but the attorney handling the estate had called, claiming Clarkson had left a handwritten letter naming me as the person he wanted to catalog his private research library before the property was sealed for auction. I almost said no. Hell, I should have. But Clarkson had been important to me when I was young. He saw potential in me at a time when my life was falling apart. Guilt and curiosity tugged at me, and now here I was, following a barely visible dirt road toward a house I'd never seen before, in the middle of a storm that felt like it didn't want me there. My phone buzzed with a text. Attorney Hughes, should be straightforward. Inventory the books, check for any personal letters. House key is under the front mat. Leave the boxes inside the foyer. Don't explore beyond the library if possible. Power may be out, so bring a flashlight. That last part struck me as odd. Why specify not to explore the rest of the house? I typed back a question, but the message wouldn't send. No service. I put the phone down and kept driving. After another mile, the road opened to a small clearing. The Clarkson farmhouse stood at the far end, its silhouette barely visible through the slanting rain. It was larger than I expected, 2 stories, shutters sagging, porch railing broken in places. The windows were dark except for one, upstairs, far right side. A faint glow flickered behind the curtain. Candlelight? A lantern? I frowned. The attorney had said the house was vacant. Maybe some automatic emergency light had switched on, or maybe lightning reflection. I tried to convince myself of that. I parked near the porch and killed the engine. The sudden quiet inside the car was almost alarming. The rain hammered the roof and the wind groaned against the siding of the house, producing a lonely, mournful sound. I grabbed my backpack with a flashlight, notebook, and boxed labels and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit instantly. I jogged up the porch steps, boots slipping on the slick boards. The wood felt soft, rotted beneath the paint. The doorknob was stiff, unmoving. I lifted the welcome mat and, just as instructed, found a tarnished brass key. When I pushed the door open, a stale, bitter smell wafted out like mildew mixed with old paper and something faintly sour. I coughed and aimed my flashlight inside. The entryway was dim but intact. Dust coated the floor in a thick layer, disturbed only by faint footprints. My breath caught. There were prints leading into the house, one set, wide strides, heavier than mine, but none returning toward the door. I swallowed hard. Maybe these were left by the attorney last time he visited, or the sheriff when they found Clarkson's body. That had to be it. The door creaked shut behind me, rattling faintly with the wind. I didn't like how dark the house felt, like it was swallowing the sound of the storm outside. "Hello?" I called out, voice echoing through the hollow rooms. "Anyone here?" Silence. I stepped farther inside. The boards moaned beneath my feet. The house felt too cold for late autumn, unnaturally cold, like the air had been drained of warmth. My breath puffed in faint clouds. The layout from the attorney's email came back to me. Library to the left past the parlor, kitchen straight down the hallway, stairs on the right. I moved into the parlor. Sheets covered the furniture, sagging under layers of dust. A grandfather clock stood against the far wall, its pendulum still. I checked my watch to see if it had been wound recently, but the clock hands were frozen at 3:17. A sudden thump sounded directly overhead. I jerked the flashlight upward. The ceiling looked normal, cracked paint, water stains, but nothing else. "Raccoons," I muttered to myself. "Squirrels, old house noises." But my voice sounded small, unconvincing. Another noise drifted down, softer this time, like slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the floor above me. My entire body tensed. The attorney said the house would be empty. I waited, listening. Nothing, just the storm clawing at the siding. I exhaled shakily and forced myself into the library. Clarkson's library was bigger than most studio apartments. Every wall was lined floor to ceiling with shelves stacked with books, thousands of them. Old leather-bound volumes, modern paperbacks, weathered academic journals, handwritten binders. The air smelled strongly of aged paper and something else, something metallic, sharp, and faintly rotten. I clicked on a lamp out of habit. No power. I set my backpack on the desk and got to work, partly to distract myself from the sense of dread building in my chest. I opened box number 1 and began cataloging the titles. For nearly 40 minutes, the rain beating against the windows was the only sound. Then I realized something odd. The footprints I'd followed in were visible on the dusty floor, clear, unbroken, and they led directly into the library. But none led out. Yet I was alone in the room, or so I thought. A soft creak behind me made my skin prickle. I turned slowly. The library door was now slightly more open than before. I was certain I'd left it only half ajar when I entered. Now it was open wide enough for someone to slip through silently. "Hello?" I called again, though quieter this time. No answer. I stepped toward the door and nudged it fully open with my foot, shining the light into the hallway. Empty. I scanned the ceiling. The sounds from earlier had stopped. The house felt like it was holding its breath. I went back to the desk, only to stop abruptly. The books I'd just finished labeling were no longer in their box. They were scattered on the floor behind me, arranged in a perfect spiral pattern, each book placed precisely like someone had taken time, careful, meticulous time to create the shape. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't wind. This wasn't the result of the house settling. Someone, or something, was rearranging objects in the room when my back was turned. I didn't realize I was sweating until a drop rolled into my eye. "Clarkson?" I whispered, unsure why I said his name. "Professor? Is this some kind of—" The floorboard under the desk groaned. Not a settling creak. A deliberate weight shift, like someone crouched there. I felt heat rush up my spine, my muscles locked. Slowly, I lowered the flashlight beam toward the shadowed space beneath the desk. At first, I saw only darkness, deep, pitch blackness. Then something shifted, a shape, barely perceptible, pulling back from the beam. Not an animal shape, a human one, a face. Pale, eyes wide and hollow, mouth slightly open as if mid-breath. For a fraction of a second, I met the gaze of something that had been waiting quietly under the desk, inches from my feet, observing me in silence. I stumbled back with a gasp, knocking over the chair. When I shined the light again, the space was empty. I spun around, heart hammering violently. The air tasted different suddenly, damp, cold, charged, like I'd stepped into a place I wasn't meant to be. The overhead footsteps started again, slow, steady, directly above the library. I ran into the hallway, head tilted upward. Plaster dust drifted from the ceiling with each footstep. The path moved from one end of the upstairs corridor toward the staircase landing. Toward me. The steps stopped. Silence. Then another step. This one on the staircase itself. Something was coming down. I backed away, flashlight trembling. The next step was quicker, then another, a rhythmic descent. My throat constricted. "Who's there?" I yelled, voice shaking violently. No reply. Just the heavy tread of someone descending the stairs in the dark. I stumbled back into the parlor, nearly tripping over a covered armchair. I pressed my back to the far wall, flashlight fixed on the staircase opening. The footsteps reached the bottom step. Stopped. Silence. My breathing echoed in my ears. Nothing appeared in the doorway. But the house felt aware now, alive in a way I couldn't understand. I took a cautious step toward the hall, shining the light in quick sweeps. Nothing. But when I reached the base of the stairs, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Footprints. Fresh footprints, formed in the dust on each step. Descending. Large footprints. Bare. Human. But there was no one on the stairs. I stumbled back. A loud bang exploded from upstairs, like a door slamming with full force. I flinched violently. Thunder followed a heartbeat later, rattling the windows. And then I heard it, a voice. A hoarse whisper, drifting down the staircase. My name. Daniel. My legs nearly gave out. It was Clarkson's voice, or familiar enough to be his. But I knew Clarkson was dead. Dead for weeks. Buried. The whisper came again. "Daniel, come upstairs." I bolted. Ran down the hallway, past the kitchen, threw myself against the back door. It didn't budge. The lock turned, but the wood stayed firm as if something pressed against it from the outside. I rammed it again, and again. The whisper slid down the hall, closer. "Come upstairs." I dropped my shoulder and slammed the door one more time. The frame cracked, and I spilled onto the soggy back porch, slipping in the mud. Rain drenched me instantly. My lungs heaved with cold air. I ran. Didn't look back. Down the hill, past the broken fence toward my SUV. Lightning split the sky. In that instant, I glimpsed the upstairs window, the one that had been glowing earlier. A figure stood there, something tall and thin, its hands pressed against the glass, watching me. I fumbled with my keys, got the door open, threw myself inside, and locked it. The engine roared to life, and I tore down the wet road, mud splattering against the side of the SUV. My chest burned. My fingers were numb. My pulse refused to settle. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest gas station 20 miles away. I parked under the lights, trembling, soaked, and shaking uncontrollably. I called the police. I tried explaining what happened. They said they'd send someone. I stayed there for hours until a state trooper finally arrived and told me they'd checked the property. According to him, the house had been locked. No footprints. No lights. No signs of entry. No sign of anyone being inside. No sign of Clarkson's library being disturbed. He told me the estate attorney would follow up with me. I asked if the upstairs window was lit when they arrived. He said there were no working bulbs in the entire house. I asked if they'd heard anything. Footsteps, voices, anything. He said no. I didn't go back. Not then. Not ever. A week later, I received a package in the mail from an unknown sender. Inside was a single book from Clarkson's library. Its cover was blank. Inside the first page, written in a shaky hand, were the words, "You shouldn't have left." The ink wasn't dried yet. Below the handwriting, smeared fingerprints. Wide, bare, the same size as the ones on the staircase. And at the bottom of the page, written so faintly I almost missed it. "He's awake now." I burned the book. It didn't matter, because ever since that night, I hear footsteps above my bedroom every time it rains. Slow, steady, descending. Story the end. The rain had been falling since mid-afternoon. A steady, cold drizzle that darkened the roads and settled into the cracks of the old neighborhood like a warning. By nightfall, it had become a relentless downpour, hammering the pavement with the fury of something long ignored. The kind of November storm that felt older than the town itself. The kind that made people hurry inside, lock their doors, and pretend they didn't hear the strange noises carried in from the woods. I was dog-sitting for my sister, who'd taken a last-minute work trip to Chicago. The house, an older two-story place on the outskirts of a small Pennsylvania town, didn't bother me during the day. It was quaint enough, a little creaky, but warm and bright, and usually filled with her dog Shadow's constant noise, panting, tail-thumping, trotting around with his favorite rope toy. Shadow wasn't a small dog. He was a black German Shepherd mix with broad shoulders and a throat-rumbling bark that could scare off a bear. My sister always said she never felt safer than when Shadow was home with her. And honestly, I believed it. But on that stormy November night, Shadow wouldn't go near the windows. It started around 9. I was sitting on the couch watching one of those crime shows that always seem scarier in bad weather, the kind where every sound in the house turns into a clue something terrible is coming. Shadow was lying at my feet, head on his paws, but every few minutes he'd lift his head and perk his ears toward the back of the house. The stiffness in his posture wasn't normal, not like when a squirrel ran across the yard or the mailman approached. This was tense, almost fearful, and Shadow was not a fearful dog. The first time he growled, low and rumbling, I muted the TV. The house hummed with that thick, storm-soaked quiet, broken only by the wind pushing against the siding and the relentless rain against the windows. Another growl. "What is it, boy?" I asked, though my voice was quieter than I intended. Shadow stood up, tail stiff, ears pinned forward, and took a single step toward the dark hallway leading to the back door. He didn't bark. He didn't run. He moved like he expected something to be waiting for him. A sudden crack of thunder rattled the windows, and Shadow jerked back, whining under his breath. That was strange enough to push me to my feet. Shadow never reacted to storms. I walked to the kitchen, flipping on the lights. They flickered for a second before steadying, a reminder of how old the electrical wiring in the house was. Shadow crept behind me, staying close enough that I could feel his breath against my leg. The back door was locked, as it always was, and the curtains covering the glass window were drawn. The yard behind the house was swallowed in darkness, bordered by a dense patch of woods that stretched for miles. My sister liked to joke that it was scenic nature, but I had always thought it felt too close, too crowded, like the trees were waiting for something. I reached for the curtain. Shadow whined sharply and nudged my arm. Hard. "Relax, I'm just looking." I pulled the curtain back an inch. Nothing. Just pitch-black night, shimmering rain illuminated by the porch light, and the thick outline of trees beyond the yard. "See?" I whispered. Nothing. Something moved. Not in the woods. In the yard. It darted across the edge of the light, fast, low to the ground, gone before I could register what it was. A flash of pale, then dark. Small, but not small like an animal. Small like a person. I jerked the curtain closed. Shadow began barking then, loud, furious, the kind of bark that shook his entire body. He lunged toward the door, claws scraping across the tile. "Hey, hey!" I grabbed his collar, pulling him back. He fought me, snapping his head toward the window like something on the other side was provoking him. "Shadow, stop!" He didn't. Not until the lights flickered again and every sound in the house seemed to fall away all at once. Then he stopped barking. He stopped moving. He stood perfectly still, staring at the window. A moment later, a soft tapping came from the other side of the glass. Tap, 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 not a knock. A nail tapping. Scratching. I felt adrenaline slam into my chest. I didn't move, neither did Shadow. His ears were rigid, tail tucked so tightly it pressed against his belly. The tapping came again, slower this time. Tap, scrape, tap. I backed away, dragging Shadow with me, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I turned every light on as we moved, counted the brightness, doing little to calm the rising panic. The tapping stopped, but Shadow kept staring. I managed to calm him enough to get him into the living room, where he paced in tight, frantic circles. Every thunderous crack outside made him flinch. I shut the curtains, triple-checked the locks, and tried to convince myself that I had imagined the figure, the movement, the tapping. I tried my sister's number, twice, straight to voicemail. The storm must have knocked out cell towers. By 11 o'clock, the wind had picked up enough to shake the house. The rain sounded like fists pounding the siding. I tried watching TV again, but Shadow wouldn't stop pacing. Every few minutes, he'd stop, stare toward the back hallway, and let out a quiet growl under his breath. At midnight, the power went out. Everything went black. Shadow froze. I grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark just enough to make the room feel even smaller. Shadow's eyes reflected the light, wide and desperate. The storm outside felt like it had moved closer, like it was pressing against the walls. Then, from the hallway, something creaked. Not the normal settling of the house. This was slow, heavy, one footstep at a time, footsteps inside the house. I didn't breathe. Shadow didn't bark. He whimpered, high-pitched, terrified, and backed away until his hindquarters hit the couch. The footsteps came again. Creak, creak, creak. I swallowed hard and whispered, "Shadow, come here." He didn't move. I took a step toward him, reaching out. A loud, dragging sound cut down the hallway, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Then a voice. Soft, childlike, wet, cold. The word was barely audible over the storm, but I heard it. I felt it. Felt the air in the room shift, like something unseen exhaled. Shadow began shaking violently. I backed toward him, lifting my phone higher, but the weak beam couldn't reach the hallway. Only the beginning of it, a slice of darkness that felt thicker than night should. Then something stepped into the light. Bare feet. Small. Filthy. Mud caked up the ankles, dark streaks dripping onto the hardwood. But the legs weren't right. They bent strangely, like the joints were in the wrong places, like the bones had been broken and healed the wrong way. Shadow barked finally, a desperate, panicked sound, but the feet didn't move. They just stood there, still, silent, waiting. My throat felt too tight to swallow, but instinct told me to back away slowly, to not run, to not turn my back. I moved an inch at a time, Shadow following only when he realized I wasn't stopping. I grabbed his collar so tight my hand cramped. The feet stepped forward, only one step, but the hallway creaked like something much heavier was moving. A shape emerged, a silhouette no taller than a child, but not shaped like a child. Too long in the torso, arms reaching almost to the knees, head tilted entirely to one side as though it was studying me, or listening. Through the dark, I heard that voice again. Cold. Shadow lunged. I didn't stop him. The dog tore out of my grip and charged at the figure with a sound I'd never heard from him before. Rage, terror, desperation all mixed together. He reached the figure and went straight through it. Not around, not past, through. He hit the far wall with a yelp and collapsed. I screamed his name and ran to him, sliding across the floor. He was breathing, but barely. His body was rigid, eyes rolled back. I grabbed him, trying to pull him up, trying to get him to move. The figure stepped closer. That unnatural voice whispered, "Stay." I don't remember making the decision to run. My body did it on its own. I grabbed Shadow. He was heavy as hell, but adrenaline made me stronger and stumbled to the front door. The shapes behind me moved faster now, the dragging sound scraping closer, louder, faster. I threw the deadbolt open with shaking hands and kicked the door wide. The storm hit me like a tidal wave. I ran into it, Shadow in my arms, slipping, sliding, blinded by rain and wind. I didn't look back, not once. I ran straight to the neighbor's house, pounding on the door until an older man pulled it open. He grabbed me, hauled me inside, shut the door, locked it twice. Shadow wasn't breathing well. He was twitching, eyes glazed. I tried to explain, but the words came out broken. Feet in the hallway, voice, something in the house. The neighbor stared at me too long before finally saying, "Call the police." By the time they got there, the storm had let up. My sister's house was empty. No footprints on the hardwood. No mud. No signs of forced entry. But the hallway floor, where the dragging sound had come from, had deep grooves cut into the wood. Long, thin, claw-like marks. The police shrugged it off, told me storms cause weird noises, dogs get spooked, and exhaustion makes you imagine things. They didn't explain the grooves. They didn't try. My sister flew home the next morning, frantic, and took Shadow straight to the emergency vet. He survived, but he never walked into that hallway again. He refused to go near the back of the house. My sister moved 2 months later. No one lives in the house now. It's been empty since that night. But sometimes the neighbors say they hear tapping on the windows during storms. Scratch marks appear on the back door, even though no one uses it. And On rainy November nights, when the woods press close and the house lights flicker, people swear they see a small figure at the edge of the trees. Too small to be grown. Too wrong to be a child, waiting, listening, whispering, cold. Story the end. The rain started earlier than the forecast predicted. A heavy, cold sheet that blurred the highway lines as I drove through rural Indiana. I was heading to a roadside motel, cheap, out of the way, the closest lodging I could find after my tire blew out 30 miles back. My phone had barely enough battery to look up the place. Riverbend Motor Lodge. No website, no reviews, just an address and a flickering vacancy sign I spotted through the curtain of rain. The parking lot was nearly empty. A single truck sat under a broken light, its bed filled with muddy tools, a tarp, and what looked like an old refrigerator door. The motel office glowed sickly yellow. I hurried inside, dripping water everywhere. An elderly woman behind the counter looked up. Her expression was not unkind, but not entirely welcoming either, more like someone who had learned not to expect good things from late-night customers. "Storm's bad tonight," she said. "You driving through?" "Trying to," I answered. "Just need a room until morning." She slid a key across the counter, an actual key, not a card. "Room 12, last one on the right." I paid and hurried across the lot. Room 12 sat beneath a failing gutter, water splashing against the door like restless hands. Inside, the room was simple. A bed with mismatched blankets, a small round table, and a television mounted crookedly to the wall. The air smelled faintly of mildew, but I was too tired to care. I changed into dry clothes, tossed my wet jacket over the chair, and lay on the bed listening to the storm. The wind rattled the thin window, the rain slashed sideways. After a while, fatigue pulled me under. I woke to tapping. Not rain, not wind. A deliberate, steady tapping on the door. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more. I checked my phone. 2:14 a.m., battery dead. The tapping came again. My heart kicked hard in my chest. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't told anyone where I was. The motel seemed practically deserted. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Nobody. Only rain falling in shimmering sheets illuminated by the weak glow of the hallway light. I stepped back, unsettled. Then the tapping resumed, this time from the window. Slow, measured, like fingers, not branches. I turned toward the sound. The curtains were drawn, but the tapping grew more insistent, more intentional. At last, I forced myself forward and tugged one side of the curtain open. Nothing. Just the distorted reflection of the parking lot through rain-blurred glass. But as I leaned closer, I noticed something on the window. A handprint. Small, too small for an adult, about the size of a child's, but smeared downward as if dragged by weak fingers. My breath hitched. I backed away quickly. The room suddenly felt colder. I grabbed my jacket and shoes and hurried to the door, ready to drive anywhere else, even through the storm. I swung the door open and stopped dead. The hallway was empty, silent, but on the concrete just outside my door, soaking in rainwater, sat a little wooden toy, a spinning top, old, paint chipped away, something a child might have played with decades ago. I nudged it with my foot. It fell over and clattered on its side. A door further down the row creaked slowly open. Room 9. The door was barely ajar, swaying in the wind, but dark inside. No light, no movement. The top of my spine crawled. Something about that open door felt wrong, like it had been waiting for someone to step close. I shut my door quickly and locked it again. I wasn't going back out. Not into that hallway, not near that room. I paced for several minutes, trying to convince myself if it was a prank, or a coincidence, or my exhausted brain misfiring. Then the TV turned on by itself. Static. Loud, sharp static that filled every corner of the room. The remote sat untouched on the table. The screen flickered white and gray, then distorted. A shape began to form in the static. A silhouette. Small, thin, a child-sized figure standing in a doorway. My stomach twisted. I reached for the remote, but the buttons did nothing. The volume increased on its own, crackling louder, harsher. "Stop," I muttered, though I didn't know who I was talking to. On the screen, the child-shaped figure raised an arm. A finger pointed outward, not toward the camera, toward me. I slammed the power button on the TV. It turned off instantly. Silence. Then, a soft giggle drifted from beneath the bed. I staggered backward until my shoulders hit the door. My shaking hand found the key in my pocket. I fumbled it into the lock, yanked the door open, and bolted outside without even looking back. Rain soaked me instantly, blinding me. Lightning flashed, illuminating the row of motel doors. Room nine's door still hung open, and now something moved inside. Slow, shuffling. Bare feet stepped into the threshold, small feet. A child stepped into the lightning's glow, or what looked like a child. Its hair hung in wet ropes over its face, clothing tattered, skin pale like waterlogged paper. Its arms hung lifeless at its sides, and its head tilted slightly, as if broken at the neck. I stumbled backward toward my car. The child took a step forward, then another. It didn't run. It didn't need to. It reached the edge of the sidewalk and lifted one hand in the air, the same hand that had smeared the print across my window. I scrambled into my car, slamming the door, slipping the key into the ignition with shaking fingers. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. When I looked through the windshield, the figure stood just feet from the hood, rain pouring through its body as if it weren't entirely solid. Its fingers curled slowly, beckoning, inviting. I threw the car into reverse and tore out of the lot, mud splashing, tires skidding. I didn't slow down until I reached the main road. I didn't stop until daylight. When I returned to the motel later with a police escort, my car still covered in mud, my nerves fried, the owner insisted only 3 rooms had been occupied last night. Mine, hers, and one more. Room 12. No one was registered in room 9. No one had been in room 9 for years. As for the police, they found my room as I left it, jacket on the chair, blankets half pulled off the bed. But there was something new. On the bedspread lay another wooden toy, a second spinning top, identical to the one I'd found outside. I left everything behind. The police didn't argue. The owner just watched somberly from the office doorway, her eyes dark with something that looked like resignation. Driving away, the sky finally clear, I noticed muddy fingerprints on my backseat window. Small, smudged, as if something had been riding with me the whole time. Story the end. Rain hammered the streets, the kind of November rain that made the world seem smaller, tighter, suffocating. I was driving back from a late shift at the diner in upstate New York, along a winding road that cut through dense forests and abandoned farmland. The GPS on my phone had long since lost signal, leaving me to navigate by memory and the dim glow of my headlights. The storm made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The road, slick with water and fallen leaves, twisted sharply. Somewhere in the darkness, a branch snapped loudly, echoing through the trees, and my pulse jumped. I told myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon, but the rational voice in my head barely whispered over the pounding rain. After nearly an hour of cautious driving, I noticed a faint orange glow ahead, broken by the shadows of trees. At first, I thought it might be a farmhouse. As I got closer, the glow resolved into a dim light coming from a small, weathered building set back from the road, an old general store, long abandoned according to local lore. The open sign flickered weakly in the rain, though I remembered it had been boarded up for decades. I parked in front of the store, wet and shivering, and stepped out of the car. The rain was relentless, soaking me instantly. I walked up to the door and knocked. The door creaked, then swung open on its own. Inside, the air was surprisingly warm, thick with the smell of mold and something metallic. Shelves lined the walls, filled with dusty cans and jars, most of them unrecognizable. A faint tapping came from somewhere deeper in the store. Tap, 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 slow, deliberate, rhythmic. "Hello?" I called, my voice quivering. No answer. I took a cautious step forward. The floorboards groaned under my weight, echoing through the dim interior. The tapping continued, moving closer. I froze. Then I saw it. A shadow detached itself from the corner of the room. Tall, unnaturally thin, its movements jerky and wrong. Its face was hidden beneath a hooded coat, the edges slick with rain. Its hands were long and spindly, dragging along the floor as it moved. I backed up instinctively, bumping into a shelf. A jar wobbled and fell, shattering loudly. The figure froze, head tilting unnaturally, listening. The tapping stopped. Silence swallowed the room. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing like a drum. I realized the exit was behind me, but when I turned, the door was gone. The wall where it should have been was solid, dark wood, as if the store had shifted while I wasn't looking. Panic surged. I ran down an aisle, hoping for another exit, but the layout of the store seemed impossible, the walls stretching and bending unnaturally. The tapping resumed, closer now, coming from above. I looked up and saw the ceiling darken as something pressed against it, scraping, moving. My breath caught. Something was walking on the ceiling, its limbs too long, bending at angles no human could manage. I stumbled backward, falling into a stack of cans, which tumbled noisily to the floor. The figure dropped from the ceiling instantly, landing in front of me. Its face remained hidden, featureless under the hood. The cold air radiating from it made my skin crawl. It extended a hand toward me, long, pale fingers twitching. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly through the aisles. The tapping echoed behind me, faster now, as if whatever it was had multiplied, surrounding me from all directions. I turned a corner and froze. In the center of the aisle stood dozens of hooded figures, each faceless, motionless, arms outstretched as though waiting for me to step closer. A sound made me spin around, a soft, wet slapping, like someone dragging something across the floor. From the shadows, a new figure emerged, smaller, crouched, moving on all fours. Its head jerked unnaturally as it hissed. The other figures remained still, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I ran toward what I thought was the front of the store, but the layout had changed. Doors led to walls, aisles twisted into themselves. The tapping was all around me now, on the walls, the floor, the ceiling, everywhere. My ears rang with the rhythm, pounding in time with my own heartbeat. Then the lights went out completely. Darkness pressed in like a living thing. I fell to my knees, hands over my head, heart racing. The air grew colder, and I felt it, hands thin and skeletal, brushing against my shoulders, my back, my arms. Whispering voices hissed in my ears, unintelligible but full of menace. I screamed and lunged blindly forward. Somehow my hands found a door handle. I twisted it desperately, yanking the door open. Rain poured in, a wall of water and wind. I bolted into the storm, never looking back. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, soaked, shaking, my body trembling violently. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The road ahead was dark but empty. For a moment, I thought I had escaped. Then, reflected in my rearview mirror, I saw a hooded figure standing in the middle of the road behind me, featureless, silent, watching. Its head tilted slightly as if studying me, and behind it the faintest glow of the store's open sign appeared, flickering in the darkness, though I knew I had left it miles behind. I drove straight home, never slowing, never blinking. When I finally reached my apartment, I checked every lock, every window. Safe, I told myself. Safe. But even now, on rainy nights, I hear the tapping, tap, 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 tap against my ceiling, against my walls, and I know it's waiting. Story the end. The November rain had been falling steadily for hours when Emma Lawson's car finally sputtered to a stop at the end of the long, gravel driveway. She had driven for nearly 4 hours from her apartment in upstate New York, following the directions her uncle had left her before he passed away. A small, secluded cabin in the woods left to her in his will. The storm had made the trees around the driveway sway and groan, their skeletal branches scraping the sky. The forest seemed alive, whispering in the wind. The cabin appeared through the fog like a half-forgotten memory. Its once white paint was chipped and weathered, the roof sagging in the middle as if it were bowing under its own weight. A single lantern flickered weakly on the porch. Emma climbed out of the car, rain immediately soaking through her coat, and trudged to the front door. The key turned with difficulty, and the door swung open with a long, low groan. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic, like rust. Dust covered every surface, and the air was cold, unnaturally cold, even with the storm raging outside. She dropped her bag and went to the fireplace, inspecting the old woodpile. The logs were dry enough to burn, but the fireplace itself was caked in soot, as if someone had used it recently. She shrugged off the thought. Her uncle had been meticulous. Maybe he had prepared it for her. Emma lit a candle on the mantel, its flickering light throwing shadows across the walls. She settled on the couch with a blanket from the back of the chair, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in her stomach. But then she heard it, a faint, deliberate footstep from upstairs. Her pulse quickened. She told herself it was the wind or the storm shaking the house, but the sound came again. Footsteps pacing slowly, almost measuring the floorboards. She swallowed hard and called out, "Hello?" No answer. Emma grabbed her flashlight and hesitated at the bottom of the narrow staircase. Something urged her to go up, though fear clenched her chest. She climbed slowly, every creak of the old wood echoing in the silent house. At the top, she noticed one of the bedroom doors was slightly ajar. She was certain she had closed it. Inside, the room was empty. But the closet door had moved, just a fraction, enough to reveal a slit of blackness. Emma's stomach churned as a sickly sweet odor drifted from the opening, like rotting fruit and damp soil. Something stirred inside. She stumbled backward, the candle falling and extinguishing with a soft hiss. Darkness enveloped her. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, behind her, not on the same floor, but somewhere close, just out of sight. And then a voice, low and wet, whispered, "Emma." Her blood ran cold. The voice sounded familiar, her uncle's, but distorted, wrong. The shadows at the end of the hallway seemed to thicken, gathering into a shape that stretched impossibly tall and thin, limbs bending at unnatural angles, its head tilted sideways, facing her. No face, just a void of darkness. Panic overtook her. She fled downstairs, trying every exit. The front door didn't budge. The back door was locked too. She hadn't locked them herself. The shape moved silently behind her, gliding across the floor. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against her chest. The voice came again, "Come." To me. Emma scrambled through the kitchen, grabbing a heavy skillet from the counter. She swung blindly, but the figure moved with unnatural speed, appearing wherever she wasn't. She ran to the windows, smashing one open and climbing out into the rain. Mud sucked at her boots as she raced down the driveway, branches clawing at her coat and hair. She didn't stop until she reached the main road, where headlights slowed and a driver pulled over. Shivering, soaked, and trembling, she collapsed into the car. When the sheriff and a team returned to investigate, the cabin was silent. Empty. No footprints besides hers, no signs of forced entry, no trace of the presence that had haunted her through the storm. Emma never returned to the cabin. She sold it quickly, unable to shake the memory of the footsteps and the whispering voice. But on stormy November nights, she swears she can still hear it in the wind, the deliberate pacing and the low, wet whisper calling her name from the shadows. Story the end.